She thought she was untouchable. She had the perfect life. A loyal husband, a successful career, and a secret affair with her boss. She was so confident, so careful, until she made one fatal mistake. She underestimated her husband, and when he found out, he didn't yell, he didn't beg, he planned. And by the time she realized what was happening, it was too late. Her career, gone. Her money, vanished.
Her lover.
Nowhere to be found. And the man she betrayed, he walked away without looking back. This is the story of a woman who lost everything, and a husband who made sure she did. Lauren Mitchell stood in front of the full-length mirror in her bedroom, adjusting the crisp white blouse that hugged her frame. Her auburn hair was pulled into a sleek ponytail, her makeup subtle yet flawless. She exuded confidence, the kind that had propelled her career forward over the past decade. But beneath the polished exterior, a quiet unease gnawed at her. The upcoming professional retreat in Aspen had been described as a rare opportunity, a chance to refine her skills and connect with industry leaders. It was everything she had worked for, everything she had wanted. And yet, as she glanced at the packed suitcase near the door, she couldn't shake the feeling that this trip was about more than just career advancement. Downstairs, Nathan Mitchell sat at the kitchen table, studying blueprints. His work as a construction site manager was demanding, but he thrived on structure and precision. The house renovations they had been planning for months were finally within reach, years of careful saving coming to fruition. Lauren walked in, hesitating for a moment before taking a seat across from him. She mentioned the retreat casually, watching his reaction. His brow furrowed slightly at the mention of Aspen, his focus shifting away from his work. A week-long trip, fully immersive, personally recommended by Dr. Carter. He asked about the cost, the timing, whether it was truly necessary. His tone wasn't accusatory, but something about his measured response irritated her. She explained the prestige, the doors it could open, how rare the invitation was. He nodded slowly, but she could see the hesitation in his eyes. They had agreed to prioritize the house, but she insisted this was different. An investment in their future, her future. As they spoke, his gaze drifted toward the sleek suitcase by the door. It wasn't their usual luggage, the sturdy kind they had always used. This one was new, expensive. The tags were still attached. Inside, neatly folded between carefully packed items, were high-end workout clothes, designer brands she never typically wore. His expression shifted, a flicker of something she didn't like. He asked when she had bought it. She brushed it off, saying she needed something professional for the retreat. He nodded, but his silence spoke louder than words. The air in the room grew heavy. He asked about Dr. Carter, the same one she had been spending late nights working with on a new patient program. His voice was calm, but there was something else beneath it. She tensed, her responses growing clipped. She accused him of being unsupportive, of holding her back. The frustration in her voice surprised even herself. She stood abruptly, knocking the chair back slightly as she grabbed her suitcase. She needed air, needed to step away before the conversation spiraled further. His eyes followed her as she stormed upstairs, but he didn't call after her. Alone in their bedroom, she leaned against the closed door, her heart pounding. She hadn't expected the conversation to escalate so quickly, but his questions had caught her off guard. Guilt and defiance twisted inside her. She told herself that he didn't understand, that he couldn't possibly see how important this was. But deep down, she knew it wasn't just about career growth. She moved toward the bathroom, glancing at her phone on the nightstand. The screen lit up with a message notification. Dr. Carter's name flashed briefly before the display dimmed. She hesitated, glancing toward the closed door, listening for any sound from downstairs. With a small sigh, she picked up the phone and typed out a quick response before stepping into the shower. The water was scalding, but it did little to wash away the uneasy feeling settling deep in her chest. Downstairs, Nathan sat in silence, staring at the phone Lauren had left behind on the counter. It had been buzzing repeatedly, the screen lighting up every few minutes with new messages. He told himself he wasn't the kind of man who checked his wife's phone. But tonight, something felt different. His fingers hovered over the device, torn between trust and the gnawing suspicion growing inside him. Then, with a slow breath, he picked it up. Everything was about to change. Nathan stared at Lauren's phone, the glow of the screen casting a pale light against the dim kitchen. His pulse was steady, yet his mind raced. He had never gone through her messages before, never questioned where she was or who she spoke to, but something about tonight felt different. His thumb hovered over the lock screen. The passcode was one he knew by heart, their anniversary date. The irony wasn't lost on him as he keyed it in, the device unlocking without resistance. The message thread with Dr. Carter was pinned at the top. That alone was telling. He hesitated before tapping it open, scrolling through a conversation that had clearly been going on for months. At first, it was all professional discussions about patients, treatments, upcoming schedules. But as he scrolled further, the tone shifted. The messages became frequent, personal, intimate. Late-night chats that had nothing to do with work. Inside jokes, compliments, subtle flirting disguised as harmless banter. Then he saw it. A message from earlier that evening. Can't wait for Aspen. Hope you packed that new swimsuit. You know how I feel about poolside meetings. Winking face. Nathan's stomach turned, his grip tightening on the phone. He scrolled back, searching for more, his breath shallow as the evidence piled up before him. Mentions of private dinners, shared hotel rooms, plans for extra time outside of the retreat schedule. One message stood out, sent just days ago. Nathan doesn't suspect anything, right? His vision blurred, his body going rigid as the words sunk in. So it wasn't just his imagination. Lauren wasn't just planning a work trip. She was planning an affair. He set the phone down carefully, as if it were something toxic. His hands curled into fists, his breathing slow and controlled. Anger surged through him, cold and sharp, but beneath it was something worse. Betrayal. For a long moment he didn't move. The house was quiet, save for the faint sound of the shower running upstairs. He pictured Lauren, standing under the spray, going about her evening as if nothing had changed. As if she hadn't shattered their marriage with a few careless words on a screen. The realization settled over him like a crushing weight. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was deliberate. Nathan had never considered himself a vengeful man. He wasn't reckless. He wasn't cruel. But this wasn't something he could ignore. Slowly, methodically, he picked up his own phone and took a series of screenshots. Every message, every confirmation, every lie. He sent them to himself, ensuring that even if Lauren tried to delete the evidence, it was already too late. Then he turned off her phone, placing it exactly where she had left it, as if nothing had happened. Upstairs, the water shut off. Footsteps moved across the floor. Nathan exhaled, forcing his face into a mask of calm. When Lauren descended the stairs a few minutes later, dressed in fresh clothes, her damp hair swept over one shoulder, he didn't look at her right away. He simply sat there, the weight of knowledge pressing down on him like an invisible force. She hesitated for a moment, sensing the change in the air. Everything okay? Nathan finally met her gaze, searching her face for something. Remorse, hesitation, doubt, anything. But all he saw was complacency. I was just thinking, he said, his voice measured. About us. About everything we've built. Lauren smiled, leaning against the counter. Yeah? That's sweet. Nathan forced himself to return the smile. It was hollow, but she didn't seem to notice. He had his answer. She felt untouchable, but she had no idea what was coming. Nathan had never been the kind of man to act without thinking. His work demanded precision, patience, and careful planning. So when he discovered Lauren's betrayal, his first instinct wasn't to lash out. It was to gather every piece of evidence, every detail that could be used against her when the time was right. The next morning, he woke up before Lauren and left the house earlier than usual. But instead of heading straight to work, he made a stop at a small, cash-only electronics store on the other side of town. He walked out with 2 items, a discreet GPS tracker and a set of tiny, motion-activated cameras. He installed the tracker beneath the passenger seat of Lauren's car, securing it in a way that ensured she'd never notice. The cameras he set up later that night, placing them in common areas of the house: the kitchen, the living room, her home office. He didn't touch the bedroom. He wanted proof, not revenge. The next few days were a test of his patience. Lauren carried on as if nothing had changed. She smiled over breakfast, texted him casually throughout the day, and kissed his cheek before heading off to work. It was almost impressive, the ease with which she lied. But Nathan wasn't blind anymore. Every night, when she went to bed, he checked the GPS tracker. Her car had started making frequent stops at a luxury apartment complex across town, Dr. Carter's residence. The worst part? She never even tried to hide it. By the end of the week, Nathan had everything he needed: screenshots, security footage, location data. Each new discovery fueled the slow, cold-burning anger inside him. But rage alone wasn't enough. He wanted to end this the right way, to make sure Lauren lost everything the way she had thrown away their marriage without a second thought. He started with the finances. Sitting at his desk late one night, he combed through their shared bank accounts. Lauren had been making small but consistent transfers to an unknown account for months. Money that should have gone toward their home renovations. She wasn't just betraying him emotionally. She was stealing from him. Nathan wasted no time. He quietly opened a separate account in his name alone, transferring the majority of their joint savings before she could touch another cent. By the time she noticed, it would be too late. Next, he gathered his contacts. Lauren had spent years building a pristine professional reputation, one she was willing to risk for an affair. Nathan knew that her career was everything to her, so he decided that if she wanted to throw away her integrity, he'd make sure it wasn't just their marriage she lost. He reached out to an old college friend who worked in legal compliance. With a little persuasion, Nathan had the name of a board member from Lauren's physical therapy clinic. A discreet meeting was arranged. Nathan didn't have to say much. He simply presented the financial discrepancies, the security footage, and a few key messages exchanged between Lauren and Dr. Carter. It was more than enough. The clinic's reputation was built on trust. A scandal like this, one involving fraud, professional misconduct, and an affair between an employee and her superior, was a risk they couldn't afford. Nathan didn't need to push. The board member assured him that an internal investigation would begin immediately. Lauren had no idea the walls were closing in. She came home late that night, claiming she had been preparing for the Aspen retreat. Nathan didn't ask any questions. He simply nodded, watching as she moved around the house with the same casual ease she always had. For the first time, he saw her for what she really was. The next morning, he received an email from the clinic's HR department. They wanted to discuss the financial discrepancies and professional ethics violations linked to Lauren. Nathan smiled to himself as he closed his laptop. Everything was set in motion. Lauren had spent months lying to him, thinking he was too blind to see the truth. Now, it was her turn to be blindsided. Lauren's downfall began quietly. It started with an unexpected email from the clinic's HR department, requesting a formal meeting to discuss professional conduct concerns. She barely glanced at it, assuming it was a routine check-in. She had no idea that behind closed doors, her colleagues were whispering that the clinic's board had already begun investigating her financial irregularities, or that someone, Nathan, had supplied them with proof of her deception. The next blow came at home. She had gone out for the evening, telling Nathan she was meeting a friend. He didn't question her. Instead, he waited until she was gone and accessed their shared bank accounts. Just as he suspected, she had made another quiet transfer to her secret savings account, the one she had been siphoning money into for months. But this time, the transaction failed. Lauren stood at the self-checkout of a high-end boutique. Her credit card declined. She frowned, tried again, but the machine rejected the payment once more. The cashier gave her a polite but knowing smile. Confused, she opened her banking app, only to find their shared savings account nearly empty. Panic set in. She left the store, stepping onto the cold pavement, her hands trembling as she scrolled through her transaction history. The money was gone. All of it. Her breathing quickened. She called the bank, demanding an explanation, But there was no fraud alert, no security breach. The representative calmly informed her that the authorized account holder had transferred the funds. Nathan, her hands clenched into fists. She could feel the walls closing in, but she still didn't understand how deep this went. The next day, she arrived at the clinic to find the HR director waiting for her. She barely had time to settle into her office before being called into a formal review meeting. The questions started immediately, about her patient schedule changes, her financial transactions, her increasingly close association with Dr. Carter. Lauren felt herself spiraling, grasping for explanations that no one in the room believed. They had documents, witness accounts, payment logs. She had spent months thinking she was untouchable. Now she could feel herself slipping. By the time she left the meeting, she knew what was coming. The clinic couldn't afford a scandal. The best-case scenario was a quiet resignation. The worst, a public firing, possible legal action. She had no choice but to pack up her office. Her hands shook as she shoved files into a box. This wasn't supposed to happen. She had risked everything. Her marriage, her job, her reputation, for a man who had promised her more. And yet, as she looked around, Dr. Carter was nowhere to be found. He wasn't answering her calls. His office door was closed. He had abandoned her the moment things got difficult. By the end of the day, her professional career was over. But Nathan wasn't finished. That night, she stormed into the house, slamming the door behind her. Nathan sat at the dining table, calm, composed, waiting. "You took the money." Her voice shook with rage. Nathan looked at her like she was a stranger. "Our money. I just made sure it was protected." She felt her stomach churn. "You had no right. I had every right." His voice was cold, deliberate. "You were lying to me. You were stealing from me. From the moment you decided to betray me, you gave up the right to call that money yours." Lauren's breathing was erratic. He wasn't supposed to be this calculating. She had counted on him being blind, being weak. But he had been watching her, planning, and now she had nothing. Her voice broke. "Nathan, we can fix this." A long silence followed. He leaned back in his chair, eyes locked on her. There was no warmth left in them.
No, Lauren.
He exhaled slowly. "We can't." Her chest tightened. "So what? You just destroy me?" Nathan stood, pushing his chair back. "You destroyed yourself." She stared at him, searching for any hint of the man she once knew. But he was already walking away. Lauren sat at the kitchen table, her hands gripping the divorce papers that lay before her. The house was eerily quiet, an empty shell of the life she had so effortlessly dismantled. Just weeks ago, she had been secure in her choices, convinced that she could have it all, her career, her affair, and her husband's blind trust. But now, with everything crumbling around her, she felt the weight of her own destruction pressing down on her chest like a heavy stone. She had lost control. Nathan had been 2 steps ahead the entire time. Her job at the clinic? Gone. Her reputation? Destroyed by whispers that had spread like wildfire. Her carefully siphoned savings? Vanished before she could even react. And now, she sat alone in the house she could no longer afford, facing the final consequence she never thought would come. Nathan's complete and utter abandonment. Her phone vibrated on the table, the name flashing across the screen making her breath hitch. Dr. Carter. Maybe, just maybe, there was still something left for her. Maybe he would help her. Her hands trembled as she opened the message, desperate for reassurance. "I think we should take some space. Things are too complicated right now." The words sent a shockwave through her chest. Her vision blurred as she read them again. Space. He was done with her. Just like that. She had risked everything for him. And now he was washing his hands of her. She tried to call. No answer. She sent a message. Not delivered. Her heart pounded. He had blocked her. A sob tore from her throat, and she slammed the phone onto the table, the screen cracking beneath the force. It was over. Across town, Nathan sat in the office of his lawyer, signing the final set of documents. With the stroke of a pen, he was free. The weight he had carried for months, The betrayal, the lies, the humiliation, lifted. His phone buzzed with an email. A job offer. One he had never expected. A top construction firm in another state had reached out after hearing of his expertise. A six-figure salary. A leadership position. A fresh start. He exhaled, staring at the screen. Lauren had thought she was moving up in the world, securing a future beyond their marriage. But in the end, he was the one who walked away with everything. That evening, as he packed the last of his belongings, he decided to take one last drive through town. One last stop. As he pulled up in front of their house, his old house now, his eyes landed on the for sale sign in the yard. Lauren stood outside, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. When she saw him, she stiffened, uncertainty flickering in her eyes. For a moment, Nathan considered just driving away. But then, she took a step forward. "Nathan," she called out, her voice thinner than he remembered. He rolled down the window but didn't get out. She swallowed hard, her gaze darting between him and the ground. She hesitated, her voice cracking. "I was wondering if there's any chance, any way we could try again." Nathan studied her, this woman he once loved. The arrogance that had once laced her voice was gone. The contempt she had thrown at him during their last fights had faded. Now she was just desperate. But as he looked at her, all he felt was nothing.
No, Lauren.
She flinched at the finality in his tone. "Please," she whispered. "I've lost everything." You did that," he interrupted, his voice cold. "Not me." Her breath hitched, her hands gripping her arms like she could hold herself together if she just squeezed tight enough. He put the car in gear. "Goodbye, Lauren." She took a step forward, her hand reaching out as if to stop him. "Nathan, please." But he didn't look back. As he drove away, the weight on his chest finally lifted. The past was over, and for the first time in months he was truly free.